I sat at the long conference table, my hands neatly folded in front of me, trying to keep my composure. I had been at Greenlife Tech for over 12 years. 12 years of blood, sweat, and countless late nights, building this company from a small, struggling startup into a name that was now recognized nationwide. From the early days when we barely had enough funds for a decent ad campaign, to the point where we were now sending our eco-friendly tech products into homes across the country, I had been there every step of the way. Today was supposed to be another typical meeting. Instead, it felt like everything I had worked for was slipping away, piece by piece. "Time for some fresh blood," Carter Price, the new CEO, announced to the room. His voice was smooth, polished, but it was the words themselves that made my stomach churn. I looked around the room at my colleagues, trying to gauge their reactions. Some looked hopeful, others uncertain. Carter, of course, looked as smug as ever, standing there at the head of the table with his perfectly tailored suit and air of superiority. I had my doubts when they brought him in. Carter had no real experience in our industry, and his resume was full of corporate jargon, titles like disruptive innovation and digital transformation pioneer. It didn't take much to realize he was more about buzzwords than actual substance. "We've done well so far, but now it's time to really take things to the next level," he said, scanning the room with that confident, almost condescending tone. "We need a fresh perspective, a new direction that will connect with younger consumers. Our market is shifting, and we need to shift with it." I could feel the tension building, my stomach twisted. "We're bringing in Tess Monroe, a digital influencer with 4 million followers, to lead the marketing department," Carter continued, gesturing toward the woman beside him. Tess looked like she had just stepped off an Instagram ad. Perfectly manicured nails, a smile that could light up a room, and an expensive-looking wardrobe. She didn't look a day over 25. I had never seen her before in my life, but there she was, ready to take over everything I had worked for. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I stayed silent, keeping my expression neutral as Carter praised her fresh perspective and social media prowess. Tess waved enthusiastically, the kind of wave only someone with millions of followers could get away with. But I didn't flinch. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing how much it stung. Instead, I nodded politely, maintaining the kind of professional dignity I had worked so hard to preserve over the years. As the meeting wrapped up, I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me. They approached with awkward condolences, their faces filled with pity. I smiled, nodded, and assured them I was fine, but deep down I was seething. Not because I had been replaced, no, that part was almost expected, but because of how easily they discarded everything I had contributed. Tess, a stranger to our company, was now going to inherit everything I had built. I walked out of that meeting room with one thought on my mind. They had no idea what I was about to do next. The days that followed were a blur, each one dragging on as the reality of my situation sank in. Tess Monroe was now the face of our marketing strategy, her perfectly curated Instagram posts, her hashtag-sponsored hashtags replacing the real gritty work that I had poured into Greenlife Tech. My email inbox was filled with meetings I was excluded from, decisions being made without me. I could hear Carter's voice in the back of my mind. "We need to bring in fresh blood," he'd said, like I was some outdated product that needed to be replaced. But I knew something Carter didn't. I wasn't just going to sit back and let this happen without a fight. I could already see the signs. Carter's management style, if you could call it that, was all about disrupting the status quo without understanding the foundation we had built. Consultants were brought in, but they spent more time interviewing junior staff than anyone in leadership. They were scouring the lower levels of the company for feedback, and I knew what that meant. My days were numbered. I started to prepare, though, in a way Carter never could have anticipated. I was no stranger to corporate politics. I'd seen it all before, especially as a woman who had fought her way through a male-dominated industry. I'd always been careful about the work I did, especially the creative aspects. One afternoon, while sitting at home, I mentioned to my husband Thomas how uneasy I was feeling about the situation. He could see the tension in me long before I voiced it out loud. "You're bringing work stress home again," he said one evening as we sat in our kitchen. I hadn't realized how much it was affecting me until I saw his concern. I ran through the recent metrics from our latest campaign, staring at the numbers. The campaign I'd designed, the one that had put us on the map, was still being used, but they were changing the face of it all. "Are you comfortable with this?" Thomas asked. "You've been analyzing cross-picture engagement for years now, way before Carter even graduated college." I shook my head, the pieces falling into place. "He's building a case," I muttered under my breath. Thomas, ever the steady presence in my life, always had one question: "What's your plan?" Not "how are you feeling?" or "what are you going to do?" but "what's your plan?" It was his way of grounding me, reminding me that I always had choices. That night I called Franklin Johnson, a corporate attorney who had worked with us in the past. I explained the situation, and after a brief conversation, he gave me advice I hadn't considered. "You created the Green Flame campaign and slogan outside of work hours, didn't you?" I nodded, remembering how I had come up with the concept on a long weekend, bringing the vision to life at home, far away from the corporate pressure. "Yes," I said. Franklin paused. "Well, then you need to copyright it under your name. It won't stop them from trying to push you out, but it will give you leverage and protection." It was a simple suggestion, but a powerful one. I immediately took action, filing for copyright protection on every creative element I had developed over the years: the slogan, the campaign structure, even the tagline I had come up with on a whim one late evening: "Where innovation meets sustainability." In the months that followed, I quietly but systematically protected my intellectual property. I didn't care if Carter and Tess thought I was out of the game. They had no idea what I was really doing. I wasn't just fighting for my job anymore, I was fighting for respect. And sometimes that respect only came when you had a legal document with your name on it. Weeks passed, and with every passing day I could feel the gap between me and the company growing wider. It wasn't just that I was being sidelined, it was that they were actively erasing my contributions. I overheard Carter speaking with one of the consultants in the break room one afternoon. They were discussing the need to shift our entire approach toward a younger demographic, how my work had focused too much on traditional values and family. They needed to skew younger, Carter said. "Lena's demographic expertise is too focused on middle-aged consumers," he continued. "We need someone who can connect with Gen Z before they develop brand loyalty somewhere else." The words stung, but I held my ground. I wasn't angry, at least not outwardly. I'd spent years developing relationships with our core audience, working mothers and environmentally conscious families who valued our products because they stood for something greater. But to Carter, this wasn't about values or customer loyalty. It was about trends and numbers. That night, I spent hours staring at the same campaign metrics that had been dismissed in that meeting. It was clear to me now, they weren't just pushing me out because they thought I was out of touch. They wanted to erase the legacy of Green Life Tech and replace it with a more marketable, Instagram-friendly version of the brand. I wasn't going to let that happen. I didn't act rashly. I bided my time, allowing Carter and Tess to think they had won. But as they rolled out their new campaigns, I kept quiet, watching. Waiting. I could already see them using parts of the campaigns I had created, just with new faces and hashtags. They thought they had it all figured out, but I knew the truth. They could change the face of the brand, but they could never truly replace what I had built. One afternoon, when I finally saw Tess appear on our company's website, showcasing the new direction, I couldn't hold back anymore. They were using my work, my vision, but they weren't giving me credit. That's when I decided to take the next step. I called Franklin again, and this time I was ready. I want to send a cease and desist letter, I told him, my voice firm. They've started using my campaign without acknowledging my rights, and I need them to stop. Franklin agreed, but with caution. Don't move too quickly, Lena. Let them make the first move. If they push you out, but keep using your work, we'll have a very clear legal case on our hands. I followed his advice, maintaining my professionalism, but I began to take action in the background. I gathered all the documents, contracts, and evidence I needed. I knew I had created these materials outside of company hours, on my own time, and I had every right to protect them. Over the next few weeks, I quietly filed my copyright claims. It was a tedious process, but I didn't mind. It gave me a sense of control in a situation where I felt so powerless. Meanwhile, at work, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. I could see how the team was reacting to Carter's changes. The younger staff seemed to be falling in line, but the senior members, those who had been around long enough to see what Greenlife Tech had been, started distancing themselves. They weren't sure what to make of Carter's new direction. Some even approached me in private asking for advice, but by that point, I knew what I needed to do. It wasn't long before the email arrived, the one I had been waiting for, a message from Carter himself, filled with irritation and defensiveness. "This is an attempt at extortion," he wrote, accusing me of trying to undermine the company. "All materials were created as work for hire under your employment contract." The tone was condescending, but it didn't matter. I wasn't backing down. I forwarded the email to Franklin without a second thought. His response was swift. "This works in our favor, Lena. Carter didn't consult legal before responding. That's a mistake." The next day, we were contacted by Greenlife Tech's corporate legal team. They wanted to set up a meeting, something they clearly hadn't expected to happen. The message was clear. They were on the defensive. They weren't as confident as Carter had been. I could hardly contain my satisfaction as I entered Franklin's office for our Zoom call with their attorneys. The tension in the room was palpable, but I kept my composure. Franklin, calm and calculated, laid out the case step by step. Harrison's work, he began, was developed outside of office hours and submitted without a work-for-hire agreement. The materials in question, her campaign framework, the slogan, and several taglines, were registered under her personal name and are protected under copyright. The attorney from Greenlife Tech, a woman named Eleanor, looked uncomfortable, and I could see the unease spreading through the room. "We were under the impression," Eleanor said slowly, "that anything created by employees during their tenure automatically belonged to the company." Franklin nodded. "That's the case for materials created during work hours, but Lena's creations were made on her own time, outside of office hours. She created them independently, and now if you continue using them, it's an infringement of her intellectual property rights." There was a long pause as Eleanor exchanged glances with the rest of the team. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't taken me seriously, hadn't realized that I would be able to back up my claims with concrete evidence. They thought they could just erase me, and everything I had done would fade away with time. The meeting was tense. I could feel the heat coming from Carter, though he wasn't in the room. He'd likely never expected me to fight back this hard. But as I listened to Franklin's calm explanation of the legal implications, something inside me settled. This was the moment where I knew, without a doubt, that I had control over the narrative now. They had underestimated me. After the meeting ended, Franklin forwarded me an email outlining exactly what would happen next. The company had 24 hours to respond to our demand to cease using my copyrighted materials. If they didn't comply, we would move forward with a formal infringement claim. The next 24 hours were some of the longest of my life. I couldn't stop checking my phone, waiting for an email, a call, some sign of their next move. Thomas could see how on edge I was. "Let's go out for dinner," he suggested, trying to distract me. We went to our favorite Italian restaurant. As we sat in the cozy booth, the smell of fresh pasta in the air, my mind kept racing. The hours stretched on, each one feeling like an eternity. My phone sat on the table in front of me, the screen blank, but I couldn't help but stare at it. Would they finally fold? It wasn't until we had finished our meal that my phone rang, and the screen displayed the name I hadn't expected: Vivian Harper, the chairwoman of Green Life Tech's board. "I need to take this," I told Thomas, excusing myself from the table. I stepped outside into the cool evening air and answered the call. "Cora," Vivian began, her usual confidence wavering. "I hope I'm not interrupting your evening." "Not at all," I replied, keeping my voice steady. Vivian continued, her tone more strained than usual. "I've just come from an emergency board meeting about your copyright claim. This situation, it's not something we anticipated." My heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. "We were never informed of your departure in the manner that Carter portrayed," Vivian said, her voice faltering. "Carter told us you had chosen to retire and were helping with the transition, but when we received your cease and desist letter, it raised a lot of questions. We hadn't realized the full scope of the situation." I took a deep breath, processing her words. Carter had lied to the board. Not only had he misrepresented my departure to the entire company, but now, it seemed, his deceit was beginning to unravel. Vivian went on, "Our legal team has reviewed the case, and they believe you have a strong position. The board recognizes your contribution to the company, Cora. We value your work, and we want to discuss a way forward that works for both of us." I didn't let myself react immediately. This was the moment I had been waiting for, but I wasn't about to make decisions hastily. "I'm listening," I said, my voice steady despite the excitement that bubbled up inside me. Vivian continued, her words carefully measured. "We'd like to offer you a licensing agreement for your copyrighted materials with appropriate compensation. Additionally, we want to offer you a position as Chief Brand Officer, reporting directly to the board. Not to Carter. We understand the issues surrounding his leadership." I stood frozen for a moment, letting her words sink in. This was unexpected. The promotion was one thing, but the offer of a licensing agreement for my work? It felt like a recognition of everything I had fought for. "Thank you, Vivian," I said, my voice calm despite the rush of emotions. "I appreciate the offer, but I'll need some time to consider it." I could feel the weight of the moment settling on me. The following days were a whirlwind. I had barely processed Vivian's offer before I started receiving calls from other companies, some of which were interested in hiring me for high-level positions. But I knew I wasn't ready to make a decision yet. My mind kept drifting back to the conversation with Vivian, to the licensing deal, and the Chief Brand Officer position. It was everything I had worked for, yet something didn't feel entirely right. As I sat in the living room one evening, Thomas noticed the quiet tension in me. He was flipping through a book when he looked up and asked, "You're still not sure, are you?" I took a deep breath. It's tempting. It's everything I could have hoped for, but I don't know. I keep thinking about what happened, how they treated me. It feels like they're offering me the prize as a way to cover up their mistakes, like a convenient fix to their mess. Thomas nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "What's your gut telling you?" "My gut is telling me there's more to this," I said. "That offer didn't come out of nowhere. There's something they're not telling me." That's when everything started to click. A few hours later, I got a call from Franklin. He had some news that changed everything. "Lena," he said on the phone, his voice low, "I just heard from a reliable source at Greenlife Tech. There's something you need to know. Carter and Tess, well, there's more to their hiring than just business strategy." I froze. "What do you mean?" "Apparently, Carter and Tess were involved," Franklin continued, "before she was hired. It seems they had a personal relationship, and Carter never disclosed it to HR or the board. They believe it could be the reason Tess was brought in, not because she was the right fit for the company." My heart dropped. I was shocked, but at the same time, I wasn't entirely surprised. The way Carter had acted so dismissively toward my contributions, the way he'd been so quick to replace me with Tess, it all started to make sense. It wasn't just a business decision, it was personal. I hung up the phone, processing the news. For weeks I had felt like I was the one being replaced because I wasn't young enough or in touch enough with the market. But this was a betrayal of a whole different magnitude. They hadn't just pushed me aside for someone more innovative. They'd done it because of a relationship that should never have affected business decisions. The pieces fell into place. Carter had been manipulating the situation from the start, and Tess had been an unwitting pawn in his plan. I didn't need to make any decisions about the chief brand officer position yet. I needed to address the root of this betrayal first. I called Vivian the next morning. "Vivian," I said, my voice steady but sharp, "I've learned something important. Carter and Tess were involved before Tess was hired. This wasn't a strategic business move. This was personal, and it undermines everything I've worked for." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Vivian finally spoke, I could hear the shock in her voice. "I had no idea. That changes everything." "Exactly," I replied. "It's time to address this issue head on, and I'm not going to let it slide. I won't be part of a company that allows personal relationships to interfere with its leadership." Vivian was quiet for a moment before she spoke again. "I understand, Lena. You're right. And I'll make sure the board knows about this. We'll handle it properly." I could feel the weight of her words. This was it. The truth was finally coming to light. Carter's days at Greenlife Tech were numbered. And Tess, well, she was simply a victim in all this too. The next few days felt like a turning point. After our conversation, Vivian promised to take the issue seriously, but I knew that talk was cheap. I needed action. I spent hours in meetings with Franklin, preparing for the inevitable showdown with Greenlife Tech. The legal team had already been notified, and I was determined to make sure that the company understood the full extent of what had been done. While the legal groundwork was being laid, I took the opportunity to meet with KitchenCraft, a smaller but rapidly growing competitor in the sustainable tech space. The CEO, Erica Donahue, had reached out to me with a tempting offer. The more I learned about their company, the more I saw the potential for a fresh start, a company that valued experience as much as innovation. Their corporate culture felt like a place where my contributions would be appreciated. I was drawn to their emphasis on sustainability, their genuine commitment to quality, and most importantly, their respect for the wisdom that comes with years of experience. At the same time, things at Green Life Tech were moving fast. I could feel the tension building. I knew that Carter and Tess were scrambling to cover their tracks. They hadn't expected anyone to fight back, especially not me. They assumed I would just walk away quietly, let them erase me and my work. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Then, on one particularly tense afternoon, I received a call from Vivian. It was clear she had been through her own set of meetings with the board. "Lena, we've reviewed everything," she said, her voice clipped but respectful. "Carter has been placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation. We're also looking into the situation with Tess." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Carter had been put on leave? I knew his time was running out, but this was faster than I had expected. "What happens now?" I asked. "The board is aware of the serious nature of the situation. They're examining the communications between Carter and Tess leading up to her hiring," Vivian explained. "It seems that their relationship wasn't disclosed, and it definitely influenced the decision to bring her in. We are taking this very seriously." I felt a strange sense of satisfaction wash over me. Finally, after everything, after the years of sacrifice, after being sidelined and replaced for no other reason than personal gain, they were finally beginning to realize the gravity of the situation. Vivian continued, "I understand if you're frustrated, Lena. We all are. But I want you to know that we are committed to correcting this. The board recognizes your contributions, and we would like to speak with you directly before you make your final decision." I didn't hesitate. "I'm listening," I said firmly. "Would you consider returning to Green Life Tech in a higher capacity?" Vivian asked. "We're prepared to offer you the Chief Brand Officer position, with a substantial increase in compensation and full recognition of your work. We also want to offer you the opportunity to license your creative materials and have full attribution for your intellectual property moving forward." I could feel the weight of the moment. It was tempting, almost too tempting. But as I listened to Vivian's words, something inside me clicked. I had worked for Green Life Tech for over a decade, pouring my heart and soul into it, but the truth was, I was done. Not with my career, but with this company. It wasn't just about the title anymore. "I appreciate the offer, Vivian," I said, my voice steady. "But I've already made my decision. I've accepted an executive position with Kitchen Craft. Their values align more with my vision, and they understand the importance of both innovation and experience. I think it's time for a change." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, but when Vivian spoke again, I could hear the respect in her voice. "I understand, Lena, and I'll be honest, we lost a great leader in you. But I wish you the best. You deserve it." The conversation ended, and I felt a strange mix of relief and finality. The offer was flattering, but it didn't matter anymore. I had already found my next step. The next day I signed my contract with Kitchen Craft, and with it I stepped into a new chapter of my career. The compensation was competitive, and the role, Executive Vice President of Brand Strategy, gave me the creative control I had always craved. But most importantly, the work was mine to own. I would no longer have to fight for recognition or battle against corporate politics. This was my chance to truly build something in my image, in a place where my experience was valued. As I sat in my new office on the first day at Kitchen Craft, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led to this moment. The betrayal, the struggle, the fights for recognition, all of it had led me here. And now, I was exactly where I needed to be. But the story didn't end there. The weeks following my decision to join KitchenCraft were a whirlwind of meetings, new strategies, and rebuilding from the ground up. It felt like a fresh start, one where my expertise was not just tolerated but celebrated. Erica Donahue, KitchenCraft's CEO, trusted me with full creative control, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, I wasn't fighting against the current, I was finally swimming with it. But as I got settled in, I couldn't completely shake the feeling that green life tech was still lurking in the back of my mind. I had walked away, but their mistakes were still weighing on me. The betrayal, the deceit, the manipulation, it all felt like unfinished business. And I knew it wasn't over yet. One evening, I received a call from Franklin. His voice, as calm as ever, held a note of satisfaction. "Lena, you won't believe this, but it seems things are falling apart over at Green Life Tech." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's happening?" Well, it turns out Carter wasn't as untouchable as he thought. The internal investigation revealed more than just his relationship with Tess, Franklin explained. It looks like Carter had been misrepresenting company performance to the board for months. He had been covering up financial discrepancies, inflating numbers to make himself look better. I felt a cold chill run through me. Carter had been manipulating the numbers? It wasn't just personal motives at play anymore. It was a systemic failure, one that had been hidden under layers of corporate jargon and hollow promises. "And Tess?" I asked, my voice steady but curious. "She's out too," Franklin continued. "It turns out her hiring was part of a much bigger picture. Carter had been using her influence to mask the company's decline. When the board found out about their relationship, it all fell apart." I leaned back in my chair, processing everything. The very people who had tried to tear down everything I had worked for were now being exposed for their own dishonesty. The truth had come out. Carter wasn't just a bad leader. He was a fraud. As the days passed, news of Carter's and Tess's downfall hit the media. Green Life Tech was in turmoil. Their stocks plummeted, and the once promising future of the company seemed uncertain. The brand that I had built with my own hands was now unraveling, and it wasn't because of me. It was because of their own mistakes. But here's the real kicker. I wasn't gloating. Not in the way I thought I would anyway. Instead, I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, not because of their downfall, but because of what I had learned along the way. Sometimes being forced out doesn't mean the end. It can mean the beginning of something better. In the time I had spent building my career and protecting what was rightfully mine, I had also learned something invaluable. Respect isn't just given, it's earned. And no one had the right to take that from me. I couldn't help but think of all the people who had warned me about corporate politics. The ones who said things like, "It's not personal, it's business." But they were wrong. It was always personal. And I had learned the hard way that business should never come at the cost of integrity. A few months later, Vivian reached out again. This time, it wasn't to offer me a job or a promotion, it was to apologize. "I just wanted to say," she began, on behalf of the board, "that we made a huge mistake. You were right all along about Carter, and we didn't appreciate your contributions until it was too late." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I've moved on, Vivian. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be now." And it was true. KitchenCraft was everything I needed. A company that respected experience, wisdom, and above all, integrity. As I looked around my new office at KitchenCraft, I realized that the real victory wasn't in winning a legal battle or watching my former colleagues stumble. It was in knowing that I had stayed true to my values. I didn't just survive the storm, I came out stronger, more confident, and in control of my own future. In the end, the greatest revenge wasn't about destroying what had hurt me. It was about walking away, creating my own path, and showing the world that no one, no matter how powerful, could ever diminish my worth.